Hello, everyone, and welcome to you all, those who are here in this room, in our seminar room, and those online. Welcome to another MBL lecture, and especially those who joined us and they are new in this lectures, MBL lecture, and are interested to learn more about Christianity in China. Just before introducing our guest speaker, which I'm sure all of you know.
I get it. I'm ready to go already. I'm a guest.
I am so sorry. But you know, it was fun to say yes. The next honored speaker.
Honored speaker.
And actually, our dean, who is, was in charge and is in charge of still of our MPL. But that is Tom's final lecture here as the dean.
Yeah.
But he will come as a guest speaker.
Yes. Let's get me the plane flight. I'm coming.
Before that, can I ask all of you, please mute yourself during the lecture, and when after the lecture, when you have a question, you can unmute yourself and do that. And I remember the previous, normally the Zoom has some had housekeeping. We forgot about the housekeeping things. But never mind, we'll not go through that kind of housekeeping, safeguarding Zoom things anymore. And then now it's allow me again to introduce to you, all of you know him, maybe even some of you much better than I do, our very honored speaker and our dean, Dr. Tom Harvey, who has been with us more than 15, now nearly 16,
16 years.
16 years.
I've been 16 years.
And this is extremely special lecture. The reason because this is his final lecture as the dean.
Wow.
And so next time we will introduce him as a guest speaker. And I'm sorry I introduced you as a guest speaker, but Tom doesn't really need any introduction, which makes my life much easier. But still, just to remind ourselves, Tom is a theologian and the theology is at heart. And his Tom's expertise is in China and Southeast Asia, Asian church and state. In Singapore, he served as chair of the Theological Review and Response Committee of the Presbyterian Church and as an executive board member of the National Council of Churches. He authored a book called Acquainted With Grief. I can't pronounce the rest. Wang Mingdao stand for the persecuted church in China, as well as numerous articles on Christianity and the Christian social engagement in Asia and South Asia. Tom is a member of the Lausanne Congress Global Diaspora Network and the European coordinator of Lausanne Europe Diaspora Educators Group, and is a missionary worker with the Presbyterian Church USA. As many of us know, Tom also has lots of different hats, only there are very few of those. And it is an honor to have this special lecture, Tom, and thank you so much for doing that for us. And it's just, it's a good way to really end MBL lecture with you there, since Tom will be with us another maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And then, yes, and his final day will be on the 5th July with us, and we will miss you.
Yeah.
So with that, please take the floor and inspire.
Actually, my official title now, and the people around me over here, is Yaya. Well, Yaya means grandpa. Right. And I've got my grandchildren coming out, and they just run around the house going, yeah. But whenever I make a good point, you can go, yeah. I'm trying to get this to go up on the play. It should. It's on the top. It's whirling in space here. It should kick in just a second. But I can go into the introduction while it's trying to get the presentation mode. Anyway. This lecture, there it goes. Oh, what happened there? Why did it go to?
Why did you, okay, no.
I was
because-
sharing screen and on mine, it says, okay. Let me just.
Do you want?
I'm gonna stop share for a second. I'm gonna do it again. Okay. Do share screen. And I'll go here. And I'll go share. There we go. Is it working? Yeah, good. There's a twofold purpose in this lecture, and it fits into the other lectures. There's been a real shift within Chinese Christianity from the 1950s to the present time, and each one of the lectures that we have been looking at touch on that. So we started off with Yang Fenggang, and he talked about what he called the awakening after Tiananmen, and a lot of that had to do with the kind of persons that were in the square, as he brought out, who were young students, radicals, wanted to see a new China, and then there was the crackdown. And so many fled, many went to different places in the world, but a few key leaders from Tiananmen became Christians. And they have gone on to be significant movers and shakers in the Chinese Christian church. And Fenggang is writing a book on that right now. He's going to be putting that together on the impact of that. And part of the impact is these were young intellectuals. These are the people at Beijing University, Fudan, elsewhere, who were some of the key figures in that developing. So it talks about, part of this is the paradoxical nature of Christianity being a public religion and having a public face. And that's what Yang Fenggang was looking at. Hannah Nation last week was looking at Wang in Chengdu, same thing. He was a civil rights lawyer who engaged the government. He said, the Constitution says we can open freely, but I don't want to join the Patriotic Association of Protestant Churches, and got into a back and forth and ended up being under arrest. All right. And I could look at Jinping of Wang Church of Beijing, same thing. But this is a very different point of view from who I wrote about Wang Mingdao. Wang Mingdao just wanted to be left alone. He wanted to withdraw. The house churches or the churches, unofficial churches, wanted to remain clandestine. All right. But that has begun to change. So there's this paradoxical nature of the public face. Today's lecture is looking at the incredible impact of Xi Jinping upon all of that. But what it goes back to also is the paradoxical nature of this place, Oxford Center for Mission Studies. And that's why I'm going to start in 2013, because this little tiny center put together a consortium of speakers and thinkers from different ideological groups, and they gathered here. And that has turned to be one of the most important conferences. I'm just in researching for this lecture, I started getting online, and there's articles about this in the New York Times, there's articles in The Economist, but if you go into put it in Chinese, it starts appearing all over. In fact, there was a conference, and I'll talk about this later, in 2018, where the people who spoke here got together and talk about the changing turn of the church towards that public engagement that began here. So again, this is a paradoxical place, OCMS. That's one thing I love about it, is that we may be small, but we touch nerves that run around that are very important. Now, how did this all come about? In 2012, I was invited to speak at a conference at Gordon Conwell called the 5th Chinese Theological Conference, and it was held at Gordon Conwell in Massachusetts. And I went. I don't think my talk was all that good. It was about Wang Mingdao, but the main thing about this conference is that it had two groups of people who had been in contention in China. One was the growing church that was beginning to impact society, and the other were the new Confucians. And the question was, there was this huge mega church that was being built in, I'm going to say this right, is it Chifu, that is the birthplace of Confucius? Is it Chifu or Chifu? Chifu. Chufu. So in Chufu, and the Confucianists were enraged They said there can be no church there. It has to be in the next province, There had to be this big wide field to keep the Christians out. The Christians are going, well, we just want to worship like everybody else. And we're kind of, we uphold a lot of Confucian values and that kind of thing. So I'm sitting in the middle of this conference and mine talks about Wang Mingdao, which is totally irrelevant, but what they're doing is really interesting. All right. But that was one of the first conferences where you had outside China, because inside China, people are very muted in what they'll say for good reason. This allowed them to air out some of those frustrations and things that were going on. And in the end, it worked out pretty good. In there, they agreed to kind of say, look, Confucianism is not a religion, it's a philosophy and a way of life and wisdom, and Christianity is a religion. So we can work out and come to harmony, right? So anyway, I'm sitting there and the person who organized the conference comes to me and goes, Tom, we'd really like to do a conference in Oxford. And they didn't know about OCMS too much, but they knew Oxford was a good place to come. And they said, we want to expand it out to bring in what they call the three bigs, or the three large ideological groups, right? They already got the Confucians in, and they wanted the New Left and the Chinese liberal scholars to come and interact with each other. And the significance of this was huge. These people did not talk to each other in China. They had strong disagreements. And the very fact of having a conference to talk about their relationship, and it was also important that the fact that they would come and talk about Christianity. Because for most academics in China at that time, there were a few that were interested in Christianity, but the big three, New Confucian, Chinese liberal, and New Left, they were the heavy hitters. And yet they knew, and they were beginning to run into academics, Chinese academics, who were Christians. And not only were they Christians, they weren't converted by foreigners. They were Chinese who had come to Christ in China, whose ways of thinking were involved in the church itself. And being curious minds as Chinese scholars, they want to know more about these things. And also, how do they interact with these different groups? So anyway, the conference expanded. We weren't sure who was going to come. A lot of people came. So we had over 50 delegates from China. And among these, some of the most significant scholars in China, because they were eager, one, to come to Oxford, right? But two, to get into a real discussion. And it's one of the great advantages of Oxford, because it's not in the United States. It's seen as a little bit of a neutral ground, especially Oxford. It's kind of a place where you can come and have this kind of conversation without being in the United States, which, you have two major contenders. England is sort of, but not as big as the elephants, all right? Okay. So this came together. But in terms of this group, and that was our logo that we put together, which is just brilliant. And you can see up the left a picture of the Beijing and Oxford, different aspects of the building together. The other thing that was we got Wycliffe Hall involved. And that took a little arm twisting and all my diplomatic skill, but having the Oxford seal would make all the difference. And so when the New York Times comes and writes the article, even though we did all the work, we set it all up, they don't mention OCMS, but they mention Wycliffe Hall, University of Oxford. They had nothing to do with it. All right, but 2013, when this happened, so many things were happening in China. It was a real crisis time. Now, that's kind of strange, because in 2001, China had been brought into the World Trade Organization, and that fundamentally changed the finances and the economy of China. China's economy boomed, all right? They began to industrialize. They had access to markets they had never had before, and China's industrial might was beginning to really take world stage. It's from 2001 to the current time that China becomes one of the 2-3 leading economies in the world, maybe two, soon to be number one, some say, okay? So very, very powerful. And that means an enormous amount of wealth flowing into China. So you go, what's the problem? Let's see, there's Shanghai skyline. That was not the skyline when I was in China back in 1988, all right? It is changed completely, all right? Trains, electric trains, everything developing. So you think, what's the problem? Well, there are lots of problems.
One is a growing income game. Okay, as money begins to, money starts to pool in areas, so you're starting to get lots of very rich people, but also still many, many poor. It's also located on the coast. So if you go to Wenzhou, you go to Shanghai, you go to Dalian, you go to Guangzhou, these places are getting rich. But in central China, people are really still very, very poor and having a hard time getting by, right? At the same time, money corrupts, all right? And it was deeply corrupting of the Chinese Communist Party this time. Everybody wanted to get rich. I mean, Deng Xiaoping said it was, the great goal is to get rich. So people are doing that. But one of the great temptations in all societies is to trade political power for money. All right. And this is happening at a time in many ways that the Chinese Communist Party has been retrenched. I could go long into that, but there's been one of the things that Deng Xiaoping did is he put on a leash the forces that force everybody into ideological conformity and control over the non-party actors. And that's still in place. So those groups are growing without the kind of checks that were in the 50s and 60s and the Cultural Revolution and that kind of thing. So it's a time opening. But this leads to what we call crony capitalism. So people who are in businesses and people who are making money start to pay off local officials. Not only that, some local officials are viciously corrupt. So they seize property of people and then they take it and then they turn it around on the market and they make millions. And they send their kids to Oxford, Cambridge, or whatever. All right, and that's that. A lot of people you walk down the streets here at Oxford come from some really bad money. Not on CMS, and that's why we ain't got no money. So my talk today is, if you got some corrupt money, park it here. We'll bless it and say, no. So the economy's booming. You got this crony capitalism going on, and Xi Jinping is in the middle of this. He's moving around different provinces and managing and that kind of thing, and he can see the problems arising. Okay, so he's growing up under this. Okay, there was many demonstrations and violence in the countryside. There were pitched battles. When people get the property taken, they come out and fight, and they get the people around, and then the local official would send in people with truncheons and even guns. So there was things breaking up in the countryside. It was a bad time out there. This was a period of when there was a rise of civil rights lawyers, and part of the reason why, like Wang and others, are gaining traction is they're defending people who've had their property taken in Beijing in the old hutongs that are being turned into strip malls by some powerful official, and they can't get their land back, and it's been taken away. So they are now appealing in court that say laws should be in place to stop this. All right, you need laws to keep political officials in check. All right, so there's all kinds of things pushing that way. And some of those civil rights lawyers, like Wang and others, are defending Christians as well, because if their church gets invaded or they get arrested, that kind of thing. And that's actually how Wang becomes a Christian. He starts to run into Christians, and they witness to him, and he goes, "Wow, I think that's right." All right, so he becomes a pastor, and then he goes to jail. So, the other thing, it was very interesting. Even in 2013, when we had the conference and talking to different delegates coming out of China, the pollution was awful. In Beijing, it was so bad you had to stay inside. They would put masks on their children. It was absolutely suffocating. In fact, one of the most powerful TV series at this time in China was this woman who just said, "Do you realize how poisonous our air is?" And she started to do the studies. It was the most popular show in China for a few weeks until it got shut down by the government. Right? But they all knew that. And when I was talking to different people at Beijing University and elsewhere, they said, "Well, I love being a professor at Beijing University, but I don't want to live in Beijing." All right, it's so polluted. So so there was a sense of trying to get the environment back into. Not only that, at this very time, there is major intrigue in China. Okay, who in this room has heard the name Bo Xilai? All right, okay. Bo Xilai was, oh yeah, he's from the same place that Pan Changchong, he's Dalian. So he was the governor manager, was a Dalian, and he was accruing all kinds of wealth. And his wife, Madame Mao, but his wife was quite a character as well. And he had moved to Kunming, where he was Chongqing, where he became a very powerful and popular figure because he's a very handsome guy, and he was kind of taking up Maoist kind of ideas and thoughts, and he had very powerful backers. And there was literally a sense of trying to get Bo Xilai to be the next premier. So all this was coming out until everything melts down in Chongqing when what's his name? Fang Lijun runs into the American embassy and asks for asylum, and then he doesn't tell them anything. And before you know it, the whole Chongqing police department's surrounds the embassy and demands that he be returned to them. He refuses. The embassy won't let him in. All right, let the police in, and finally, all these police from Beijing show up, and the two groups face off. And finally, the Chongqing desists. He then knows that there's Beijing police. He releases himself to Beijing. He's put on a plane to Beijing. A few weeks later, Bo Xilai is arrested. But far more important is the arrest of Zhou Yongkong. Zhou Yongkong, you know, they have this thing about catching flies and tigers. Flies are just little petty bad guys. Tigers are the big ones. And Zhou Yongkong, he was a tiger. Right? This guy had power, wealth, was head of public security, had all kinds of things, and he's arrested. All right, and in prison. So, and this is all 2012, 2013, okay, when all this is going on. And so all of this was impacting when all these people came here. And so there was a sense, all right, that there needed to be a conversation about this, and that to get the different groups together, because there was a sense of a need for reform. That China was in trouble, and this was true of the government as well, that these things had to be dealt with. And so what we have in terms of these ideological groups are different trajectories in order to deal with these problems in China. All right. So the big three, you had the liberal, and we'll look at each one of these, New Left and New Confucian, all right, as well as the Christianity, all right. And what they were looking at, all agreed, is that there was blessings to economic development, there were curses to economic development, and that had to be addressed. And also, what is the role of personal freedom in modern China? Because you have the growth of civil society at this time. There are artists that are beginning to rise up and do really great work. A lot of them are Christian arts. So some of the best art internationally is now being produced in China. I mean, one of my favorite artists is a guy named Ding Fang. And he would do these big canvases, you know, it's called Resurrection, and it's all modernist, explosive force. It's just incredible things. And he put them on the square at Beijing University, and then they told him to take them down, and then after a while he put them back up. Yeah, but all these things are happening. You also had, this is what Ai Weiwei is coming up. You have writers, speakers. It's a time of real development of personal freedom in China. The place of Marxism and socialism in the state, what is their role in provision for the common good? The political system and the place and role of culture and religion in the modern world. So how are the religions to play into them? This is why Christianity was so important, because it was a major player. In fact, when you read the articles in China about religion, especially Christianity, their concern is that Christianity is getting too big. So in Chinese, 一教独大 is not good, which means one religion only big, all right? And they're referring to Christianity. So officials are like going to the Northeast and into different cities and stuff. And Christians are big and powerful. Wenzhou, you have billionaire Christians who are building huge churches in different aspects and places of the country. So there's a sense of wanting to deal with Christianity. Christianity is in the mix, all right? So yeah, the rise and growing influence of the Chinese Christianity is why they're willing to come and talk and say, what's their relationship to Christianity? And does Christianity have anything to offer in that regard? All right, so let's look at the different voices and what kind of things they were upholding. Let's start with liberalism. One of the things about liberalism is one of the things that they held to is what the universal values, all right? 普世价值 is the Chinese, okay? And that was the sense that those had been, emphasis on universal values and human rights were seen as true by the liberals. But many of the critics said, no, those are Western values. All right. So if you're holding universal values and human rights, you're actually Western, trying to impose Western views of philosophy onto China. Okay. And so one of the things at the conference here, a lot of the papers were on why these are universal truths and not simply American importation, because that's the kiss of death for anything in China. If it's seen as part of imperialism and colonialism, it's a no-go. But for these Chinese liberals, they're saying no. Freedom of the press, freedom of the judiciary, all these things are things that are universally true, that if we're going to catch up with the modern world, we're going to deal with corruption, that kind of thing, we have to have laws in place that stop official. Second thing, separation of the powers. One of the things they see is the judiciary is weak, and they want the judiciary to have the law to indict and convict criminals who are corrupt. If the local power has more power than the judiciary, how do you hold them in check? So one of the things they're beginning to argue for is what's called separation of powers, the judiciary from the executive. They believe in modernization and marketization because they see that as the engine that has led to the development of China, and they see free markets as a way that bring freedom in all other aspects of life, including the academics and religion and all the rest. So they're pro that in favor of that. They uphold emphasis human rights. Let's see what else. Also, they want broad arguments, not narrow arguments. And what they find in the academy is they can't think freely if everything is contained by narrow arguments and harsh enforcement. So if you disagree, you get silenced or you get put in jail. If you're an academic, I would have been, they would have thrown away the key on me a long time ago. So, but so they're wanting to have some relative liberty, and most importantly, all this is so freedom of religion, all right, be able to express, and that's in the Constitution. They want that upheld. A sense of universal values, we talked about something about, but most importantly, development of civil society. Okay. Now, by civil society, what's referred to is spheres of sovereignty that are not government contained or government controlled. So the church, in a sense, is a sovereign sphere that's run by church members, not a government official. If you're a member of the university, it's run by the university and not necessarily government controlled organization. So this idea of civil society, of sovereign spheres that are beneath the government, but not simply individuals, is seen as very important for the liberals. And they see this as wanting to expand in the arts, in the sciences, in other areas, not just official government organs, but actually places where these would be self-contained, self-controlling, free entities within a constitutional system that protects it. They want a constitution with laws, all right? And they want to see the rule of law applied to all people. So the sense is that the law holds everyone in check, all right? Even government officials. So if a government official breaks the law, they should be held accountable by the law, right? So they want to see that develop. And that requires an independence of the judiciary. right? So this is another thing they're looking at. And they also argue to transform state control of the economic system and to have open markets, okay? Finally, they want the freedom to be able to honestly and accurately look at the mistakes of the Chinese Communist Party over history, because you can't correct things if you can't critique, right? And there's a long history in China going all the way back to the 1950s. They'd have great moves to improve agriculture, and they'd say everything was great and production levels were right, but they were lying. And so then they would, how come we don't have food to eat? Well, we're supposed to be knocking out and having all these great harvests, but we don't have food in the markets. All right. So they finally go, well, let's bring in some scholars, and the scholars come in and go, well, I don't know if I want to tell you anything. And I'm saying, why? Because last time I told you what was happening, you hit me on the head. And okay. We won't beat you on the head. Tell us what's going on. Well, you've got all this corruption going on here, and you're not going about it the right way. All the data leads to you do it this way, this way, this way, this way to develop agriculture in China. All right. But then they do that, but the officials who are being criticized beat them on the head. The intellectuals want to be able to speak truth to power. Okay, so this is one of the things that the liberals are asking for, and they think that's the right role of academics in the world, is to speak truth to power, right? Through science and technology, and not be overly constrained. So liberal ideology sought to transform Chinese society through appeal to modern pluralism, democracy, and the rule of law. Chinese liberals championed decentralized economy and encourage social change through development of science, individual liberty, and democratic processes in China. These are crucial, they argued, for China to sustain a market economy. Through the liberal ideas have gained influence in China today. Others claim that liberalism was too Western, decadent, and socially divisive. So now we need to look at the next group, which is the New Confucians, all right? Now, New Confucianism was a very, very powerful, it still is a powerful voice within China, all right? One, it's distinctively Chinese, so you couldn't call it Western. And it's the question, of course, was religion or philosophy, but the critical thing is it's a political and ethical framework to guide relationships that order human life between the state and the province, the official and the individual and their children, and the children to their elders. The goal of New Confucianism was to adapt these relational categories and wisdom to transform political, social, and family life in China, right? Now, one of the things that's very, very important about this is it's profoundly anti-liberal, okay? It is hierarchical and patriarchal, right? It rejects individualism and views ruler and subject, father and son, elder brother and younger brother, husband and wife, and friend as essential relationships that must be maintained, right? And upheld. And there must be deference in that order, okay? Now, why would this be so important? Because the Confucians argued very trenchantly that unless you have the internal controls of virtue, you will have the anarchy that you see in the state today, all right? So if you can train people up from the time of their children to show benevolence, to show righteousness. I like the third one, Li, which is decorum ritual. We got a new college grad here. What's your motto?
Manners maketh man.
That's right. I think that's one that needs to come back. One of the things that it's the one English banner in all the Oxford colleges. All right. And it's a sense that if you have people with internal controls, external controls are not as needed. All right. If you have a virtuous people, they will honor that. And if you have people who honor these relationships, you don't get anarchy, you get order. Right. And so Confucianism was very, very important. It's distinctively Chinese. It rejects the Western view of freedom as autonomy. That's a really important point. Westerners are by reflex believe that autonomy is the secret to power and all things good. Most cultures don't believe that. Most cultures believe it is only those who are disciplined who have freedom. All right, let me give you an example. I'm a tennis player. I used to be until my ankles and my knees and didn't get out. But if I just gave my grandkids some tennis rackets, go out and do whatever you want with a racket and a tennis ball, see how it works out. They're gonna spend their whole time running around picking up tennis balls and go, Dad, I don't like this sport at all. Right? No, you have to train under a trainer. You have to learn the virtues of good tennis. You have to train the body under severe discipline and obedience. And you have to do it over and over and over and over and over again until you get to the point where you're actually free to play tennis. You see, when you see the finals at Wimbledon, those guys, Alcaraz and those guys, they have a freedom to play at a level that they could only play at through years and years of discipline and training. This is a Confucian framework of thinking, and the way most ancients saw the nature of human life. Autonomy doesn't get you far, and individualism doesn't get you far. You have to be part of a group, and you have to be part of a community that sets standards and disciplines by which you live by. So anyway, it's very popular, as you can imagine. So it sees, it says knowledge, wisdom, discipline, and obedience are at the root of righteousness and harmonious society and politics. So Confucianism has had real traction in China. As I said, it rejects individualism and especially the anarchy of the West. That's one thing that, as American, and I look right now at the United States and I look at the anarchy of our political system, I'm embarrassed. And I'm scared. Because Americans right now, I don't think have the ability to discipline. All right. That's why people get shot in shopping malls. People go in with AR-15 and start blowing people away. There's no internal controls. And from the time our children are 4 or 5 years old, we pat them on the back, go, yeah, do whatever you want to do. Don't let me impose my values on you. All right. Most culture looks at that and goes, that's nuts. All right. That leads to anarchy. All right. Anyway. So you can see why that was really, so let's go to the next slide. Okay. The New Left, all right, came and a very powerful voice. New Left is counter to liberalism. China and economic reforms toward globalization, they argue, have wrought fundamental economic and social disorder, all right? The rapid development of marketization and the rise of social contradictions had led to economic injustice. It has not created a middle class in China, just rich and poor, all right? Accumulation of wealth is at the root of crony capitalism and all the bad things we see in the country, all right? There's social polarization, all right, where the have-nots are being separated from the haves, all right, and things are not being distributed well, all right? An increasing accumulation of wealth in private hands and the loss of what used to be communal property now is private property. And this is very disturbing for Chinese who had grown up on communal farms and communal villages where everybody supposedly owned everything, and there was some truth to that, okay? Although powerful officials tend to have more. But further, in the absence of a dominant middle class, China has been evolving toward a polarized society with extreme wealth and poverty, especially in terms of different regions of the country. So the New Left held that unrestrained embrace of markets and capitalism had diluted the role of the state to ensure the just distribution of social and material wealth. If liberals offer a moderate progressive, the New Left would question, where do I see the progress? All right. What you've actually brought to us is set us back. Now, there are some brilliant scholars among the New Left. They say, look, we don't want to go back to the Cultural Revolution in the bad 10 years. But they believe something's been lost in the Deng Xiaoping era of opening up in terms of markets and that kind of thing. All right. So that was the New Left. And then we talked about Christianity in the big three. Christianity is kind of in the middle of all this, all right? And it was a very good conference because all sides spoke with each other and all sides had pretty good things to say about the good influence Christianity could have. So one is in terms of liberalism, the freedom of religion. The Nobel Prize had gone to Liu Xiaobo, who a noted writer and thinker, and he's not a Christian, but he spoke favorably of Christians. He said one of the things is it's very hard to curtail religious freedom with Christians because how do you penalize people for praying? So one of the great examples he saw as the power of freedom was the freedom Christians had to pray at any single time. All right. There was at the conference we had Sun Yi, who was the theologian at Wang Church, but also at Renmin University, and he had not been let out of the country, but he was let out of the country for our conference. That was the first time I spoke, and the people who put the conference together were so excited about that. There were favorable nods from the New Left. Wang Hui in his paper, although he didn't come, essentially, he's the most brilliant scholar of the New Left. And he submitted a paper which was really good, and then he didn't come because he thought it was kind of a trap. So in the end, he did not come, but he submitted his paper. But one thing in his paper, he gave favorable nods to the legacy of Christianity, standing up to the powerful and standing up for the marginalized and impoverished. The problem was that at the conference, all right, I already told you about that. Anyway, in terms of Confucians, there was much of Christianity they agreed with too, Christian virtues and people who have internal checks, who have a sense of propriety and a sense of moral order and not just consumerism and marketization, right? But there were also tensions. There was recognition that one could be fully Christian and hold to Confucian ethics. So that was a good point of agreement. Tension on the liberative emphases in Christianity versus the hierarchical, patriarchal, and conservative. One of the things that Christianity has represented from its very coming into China was that people with more liberative, especially women, embraced Christianity to get out of the kind of role that they had been put into. So you find some of the most powerful people in China in terms of the revolution and liberation who are Christians. Cora Deng is one of those people in the revolution. You had a lot of women who were very much part of the Chinese Communist Party who were Christians early on, but later you could be both. But anyway, and finally, just go past that one. All right. Okay. So. Now, one of the strange things about this thing, and I mentioned this earlier, even preparing this paper, I came across something really fascinating because at the time we didn't get mentioned, but it was written up in the New York Times, and it was written up in The Economist, and it was written primarily about Christianity's engagement in China as an indigenized, as a Chinese faith and religion now, but also having a public face and a public engagement. And so then I started to look at it in the Chinese, and it starts appearing all over the place. They've had conferences ongoing in China talking about what was discussed here and what its significance is, both good and bad. The problem is I only got onto these just a couple of days ago. I haven't read through them all. All right, and these are people who spoke at the conference and are now reflecting on it. And you can see it back. So this conference has been a significant player in terms of what this series is all about. That the consensus that was formed here and the group of them coming together and putting together a consensus statement has been a statement of engagement ever since. And as Yang Fanggang has pointed out, this is a generational shift. So if you want to understand Christianity in China, it's no longer the withdrawal backwards, it's the public-facing engagement. Now, that's not always easy when pressure is being put on for various ideological and political reasons, but it is a genuine shift that has now taken place in China. Now, we were all glorying in this, and this thing it got written up in China, got written up on all those things. So Wang Wenfeng, who's the guy on the right, who's the great organizer, and the guy behind him is a new Confucian scholar. They came to me and said, "Tom, we got to do a second Oxford conference. We got to build on this." So I said, "Great." So I went out, got all the money I needed, put this all together, had everybody coming. And the one thing this time, Wang Hui and the best New Left were coming. This time they weren't good. And so the way I always did these things, I asked the Chinese, what do you want to talk about? I didn't tell them what I was talking about. I said, what do you guys want to talk about? They said, the topic we're all interested is in universal values and Chinese distinctives. Right? Or 不是家之友，中国特色. All right, okay. So that was the thing they want to do. And then all of a sudden in January, I get these in January 2015. I've already got the money down for the place to put the thing. I've got all these people who said they're coming and everything. And all of a sudden I get these letters from professors who are writing me like, I think you should postpone the conference. I don't think we may not be able to attend. So I started digging around and go, what in the world's going on? Because this is not the normal thing. And so I finally started around and I felt like I called off 1 week before having to put down 20,000 pounds on that I wouldn't have got back. All right. And that's because I came across a document called the Qibujang, right? And also document 9. Okay. So what's the Qibujang? Qibujang it means 7 things you can't talk about. All right, okay, the no talk abouts. What can't you talk about? Universal values. Who's your judger? Can't have that. All right. Freedom of the press. Can't talk about that. Can't talk about civil society. Can't talk about civil rights. Can't talk about CCP's historical mistakes. You can't talk about crony capitalism. And you can't talk about judicial independence. I don't think the liberals are coming. Then I got a hold of document 9, which was they have all these secret documents, but then they don't say secret, right? And basically document 9 reads, and this was official documentation after several speeches by Xi Jinping, who had now come to power by 2015. And that it is illegal to promote Western constitutional democracy. An attempt to undermine the current leadership in socialism with Chinese characteristic system of government will be punished by law. Okay. 2, promoting universal values in an attempt to weaken the theoretical foundations of party leadership is now illegal. Right. 3, promoting civil society in any attempt to dismantle the ruling party's social foundation is illegal. Promoting neoliberalism, attempting to change China's basic economic system is now illegal. Promoting the West's ideas of journalism, press, challenging China's principle that the media and publishing system should be subject to party discipline and serve the party. Okay. 6, promoting historical nihilism, trying to undermine the history of the CCP and of New China. And finally, that everybody needs to pay close attention to the work in the ideological sphere. All right. And this is in 2015, and so you get the big chill, right, on all of the different schools at this time. And what this points to is what we call the rise of the statists. And the statists are not any of the groups we've looked at, but probably closer to the New Left. And so one of the things of the New Statists, who are scholars at Beijing University, Fudan, and elsewhere, they argue that the CCP sovereignty does not call for the rule of law, all right, but the rule by law. So rather than the law being a check on everyone, it's a tool to be used by the party to bring about the just state, okay? But there's never a rule of law, it's a rule by law. Okay, and they argue this is the only way you can deal with anarchy, because if not, you get tangled up in what they call judicialization. So they look and, gosh, you just couldn't look at a better example than in the United States. All right, you got Trump in one court, you got Hunter Biden in the other. People using the law to tangle and throw people and to get at your political enemies one way or another. And it's a mess, all right? And it may not sort out well. But they look at that and go, that's crazy. The law can have no authority over the power and can have no, because the law, they have to use the law to bring control to society. That argue that universal values equals Western liberal democracy, and it's inappropriate for China and China exceptionalism. That the kind of anarchy that they see needs strong, forceful China engagement. So these people are called the New Status, or they're called the neo-authoritarians, the status who both argue for a strong CCP control and intervention, but argue that this must be mindful of economics and view that greater power and intervention of the CCP and party leader actually enhances China's economic growth and political power. Now, this is very interesting because there's some Maoism in this about, the power of the state, but it's not, in a sense, against the forces of international markets. In fact, what Xi Jinping offers, and when you listen to what the Chinese Communist Party, they say, actually, we're a better way than the West. And it's very attractive internationally right now. A lot of people are looking at this and going, this may be a better way to run things than the kind of liberal democracies in the West. Because we can actually steer and gear our economy to meet needs strategically in large state movements, right? So those are things, they believe in intervention. So who are the losers here, right? Well, one thing is the liberals. When you look at 2013 and you look at 2024, the liberals have grown quiet, all right? Universal values are now seen as Western, right? The idea of having the rule of law is seen as judicialization and not allowed, all right? Rather than building civil society, no to civil society. Not only that, all aspects of society are to be run for the government and they are to function to the benefit of the nation by the state directing them into what they want to do. Okay, so the press, the academy, religion must now align and support the CCP. They are tools to be used and directed by the government to bring the new society, okay? And not freedoms, individual freedoms in themselves. Okay, what about the Confucians? How are they fare? Now, Xi Jinping, this is a book he wrote, How to Read Confucius by Xi Jinping. Okay? So Xi Jinping sees a lot of good in Confucius, all right? Why? One, it's good because it helps to adapt Marxism to China's specific reality, and to have Marxism with Chinese characteristics, and he sees it. But he argues that Marxism is the soul of China, but Confucianism is the root. And he says neither ideology can be abandoned, instead they must be merged. Xi's rationale for reintroducing Confucius to Chinese society rests on three political factors, all right, or primary factors. Promoting political meritocracy and anti-corruption efforts, all right, okay, because it stands against corruption and virtue, all right. Pursuing more balanced economic growth to include previously neglected regions, so balance and fairness, reinvigorating party legitimacy and cultivating a consciousness of Chinese cultural and political superiority, okay. By turning towards a moralistic Confucianism, Xi could then justify purges of corrupt officials, promote the idea of meritocratic governance, and address perceived social inequalities, draw clear distinctions between China's political model and the shortcomings of Western democracy. In promoting Neo-Confucian resurgence, Xi seeks to monopolize a claim to the meaning and legitimacy by appealing to Chinese cultural and moral traditions, and most importantly, subservience to the ruler, all right, which is part of the 5 relationships, okay? So a sense of order. But he still holds that Marxism is the core, right? So he says, if we deviate or abandon Marxism, our party will lose its soul and direction. Therefore, he says, on a fundamental issue of upholding the guiding role of Marxism, we must maintain unswerving resolve. So though he allows for confusion and sees, again, a tool that can be used to bring harmony and deference to the state and state rule, it cannot be seen as premier, and we're not going to set up a society. Okay, finally, the new left. And I chose this picture on purpose because the new left in many ways was calling back to a return to a more Maoist framework and a more kind of revolutionary framework in that work. But one of the things that she has maintained is they must continue to rev up the economic engines. For the China dream to come about, for the harmonization of the country, there must be financial return. And this is kind of the dilemma that the Chinese Communist Party faces, all right? In one sense, they argue this is the best system. This is the system that will allow China to flourish, to become wealthy and powerful, and an example to the other nations to follow. It may be authoritarian, it may be top-down, but it works, right? But, you know, there's a great Chinese idiom, 骑虎难下, all right? If you ride the tiger, it's difficult to unmount, right? And one of the things, that means that the economy has to keep generating and keep going. And there are sometimes problems with state organizations of economies where the private sector actually makes up for deficits oftentimes in the West. That doesn't always come. So we've seen this in the housing crisis in China, which is very desperate. And also people are losing all their savings and everything because they thought housing was safe. All right. And the very thing that they kind of laughed at the West in 2008 with our housing crisis, they're facing now. And so people who put their money into housing, everything are losing everything. So there's things that went really their way, but it's mixed. The status wished to maintain marketization of the economy, a strong state in guiding control of some aspects of industrialization. So in each group, I mean, the liberals were the big losers, but the other two had their place, okay? Coming down to it, what about Christianity? Well, Christianity is a powerful force in China. And I've given talks on synicization before, and I won't go into all the, but one of the things that she is the only premier that I know that has given full speeches on how Christianity needs to sinicize, what he calls it. Or some call it Chinification. Yang refers it to Chinification. But this is a sense that the church line up with official ideology of the state and state leadership of society. So they have put all kinds of things in place to ensure that Christianity abides by official policy and ideology. All right. And there are three aspects to this. Again, I've lectured on this, so I won't go, but one is ideological, the second is bureaucratic, and the third is legal. All right. So all those changes have put in place. All right. And with this last two slides, I'll finish. They put in what's called the Wu Hua 5 transformations, all right, which are localization of churches and regularization of management. What does that mean in practical terms? What they broke off were all horizontal religious and Christian connections. So more like the spoke on a bicycle wheel, the power at the center with the United Front ideological, which is enforcement to make sure everybody follows CCP. But as a local church, you only have local power. Now, before people were developing international relationships, you had Bible societies, everything else. You had conferences in Seoul, conferences in Thailand of all these urban church leaders and everything. Nope. You must report to the local authority and only up that line, and you only work with your local church. So you only have roots to the center. You can't develop lateral relationships. Very, very important. And regularization of management means that the state determines who your pastors. They have to approve who your pastors, who your leaders be. Anything done in the church now has to be approved by the United Front Work Department. Okay. Only CCP approved leadership of churches. Bandihua, indigenous theology, which means making your theology and your understanding of the text, and even they dabbled into retranslating of the scriptures so that it conforms to United Front ideology. Right. And last, maybe you'll know more, we'll talk about this in discussion. Well, this was a big discussion when we had the conference over at LST. They were trying to get Nanjing Seminary to put together a new translation of the Bible that was in harmony with the ideology of the state. that was running into all kinds of problems because any scholar touched that with a 10-foot pole, they would be cursed for life. All right. There's certain things you don't mess with scripture. All right. It's hard to even get a good translation. Then my Chinese friends will vouch for this. The Chinese Union version was written 1919, and it's all in this very ancient Chinese kind of writing and text that's no longer familiar. So we tried to get new versions of the Bible that were much better translations. But when the church found out about it, they go, "That's a translation, it's not the Bible." Only the Chinese Union version is the Chinese that Jesus used. I love it. It's just like American King James. All the these and thous. Anyway, all church documents have to be compatible, right? And all church finances have to be open and investigated by the local Public Security Bureau and the. So if you're doing anything, spend money to send people to OCMS anymore. All right. Okay. All right. The Wu Jin, all right, or the 5 penetrations, right? Okay. PRC policies, laws, and regulation must be introduced and enforced in churches. So now in church services of official churches, there will be a worker who'll get up and tell you what the policies, laws, and regulations. It's just after announcements, and before collection, that are enforced in the churches, and they have these things, all right. Regular official inspection of churches, make sure you're doing things the right way. Culture and science and patriotism promoted by the churches, so you have to have patriotic days and celebrate the country and propound teaching the thought of Xi Jinping. You have to have teaching on solidarity with the masses, right? Which shouldn't be hard. There's a lot of New Testament. So harmonious society must be promoted in the churches in their and preaching and teaching. And finally, patriotic worship. In fact, they come out with a new synicized hymn book. All right. And they've forbidden the old, what's the hymn book with the woman who's written like 500? It's very popular. We sing it as OCGC sometimes. Yeah. You can't sing her songs anymore in churches, but you can sing other great things like the great song, "The Contribution of Chinese Religion," "The Joy of Your Nation," right? Promoting synicization of Christianity. And finally, one called "The Beauty of the Four Propels," which refers to the promotion of the introduction of the national flag, the Constitution, the laws and the regulations, and socialist core values, and astounding traditional Chinese culture into places of religious worship. So the response to Christianity has been the enforcement of synicization. All right. Has it worked? I would say no, from my talks with people coming in and out of China. People will show outward deference and they keep it into themselves. The second thing is because if you mess with scripture, you'll create problems and differences. The other thing is you still have 2 churches. You have the official 3 South Patriotic Movement churches, TSP churches, and you have the house churches, right? And many of those have broken down into smaller groups and that kind of thing. But the CCP can control the public churches. They can do inspections, but they can't do inspections on the house churches unless they know they're there. Now they're trying to find out that. The other thing, and again, I've spoken on this before, the contradiction that they have a very hard time dealing with is the amount of Chinese around the world, of the Chinese diaspora, that will eventually head back in the country. And China has a very hard time controlling what all of you guys think. All right. And they're trying. There are people in London who are trying to follow up on Chinese Christians and that kind of thing. But what they'll find is very disturbing because the Chinese church is the fastest growing church in the UK, right? And this is the man who's done the research on that. So anyway, that's my talk. I think it sets up next week's with Sealand, who's going to talk about He Guanghu and the public engagement of that. And he's really the expert on that. But the paradoxical nature of Christianity now having a public face is present, and the paradoxical nature of OCMS that did something I didn't even know. I finding this out of the impacts of a stone in the water, now 10 years later, and it's continued to have effects. So with that, we open it up for conversation and discussion.
Thank you so much. That's helpful. Since we do not have enough time, we have only 22 minutes for question and answer, and I'm sure you have lots of questions. May I ask you to stop sharing so we can see the participants on the Zoom? And then the Zoom, wonderful people on the Zoom, may I ask you to, if you have a question, raise your hand. And then when it's your turn, just unmute yourself. I will call you and unmute yourself and ask your question. Use this reaction buttons in the bottom of your computer to raise your hand. And the same people here, you just raise your own physical hand. You don't need to raise it. Thank you. Can I just, one of the things, now I understand why Iran and China are friends. But one thing which it came to my, while we were talking, I noticed China, the new China as the economic things is new since early 1990s or late 1980s, as you mentioned. So the China is not only focusing on the development of the economic to become the world #1 economic in the world, and then also it is struggling with meaning making of the new concepts coming to the Chinese. I mean, the system rather than the meaning making, the system in making new meanings of the new concepts, or not the new concepts within the China. And then the problem of those concepts like democracy, like human rights, or these things, the measuring stick is the Western measuring understanding, Western theories or these things. The measuring stick does not match the Chinese culture, worldview, and mentality, though they don't mind to adopt the capitalism in relation to the economic things. So in that sense, and then the Chinese government, and on the other hand, you mentioned about the neo Confucianism, and on trying to establish a new framework that would allow the new meaning making for this civil rights or rights, human rights, religious freedoms, or these things, and at the same time create regulations and losing the regulation. It is a tension. The tension, what I notice is from your talk, the tension is not in the economic side. The tension is within the cultural mindset, is of mainly relation to the meaning making of the new concepts and implementation of those new concepts, and with the wrong measuring stick. How can they create a right measuring stick? Are they introducing this new Confucianism because they wanted to create a new measuring stick?
Well, let me answer in a couple of ways. One is measuring sticks and how you evaluate something has a lot to do with first principles of what's involved. Okay? So you're right that because of the power of the West and the power of Western meaning making, the kind of measuring sticks of what constitutes freedom, the freedom of the press, all those things have largely been, and also leading universities and that kind of thing. But but if you're coming from a Confucian perspective or another perspective, you'll have different kind of measuring rods as to what makes a good society. Okay, so take Confucianism. The reason why you come up with a term like new Confucianism is exactly right, Sarah. They realize we live in a modern era. This is not 1899. All right. This is in 2024. How can we make the truths we know, the wisdom of Confucius, relevant today? So one of the things is they're going to use their measuring rod on that. The measuring rods are things like order. The measuring rods are virtue, character, purpose, wisdom, proper understanding of manners and culture. And those are going to be the things that measure a person, not the kind of measures of how much autonomy and freedom I have. So one of the things that New Confucianism is doing and doing very powerful is, how does that stand? Take New Left. Their measuring stick is not going to be the traditional treasure chest of the West. It's going to be, what's the difference between rich and poor? What about the contradictions that happen in market economies? How can we establish the national salvation through fair distribution and making everyone wealthy, and setting up idealism, an ideal of the communist vision or the Chinese communist vision of that, and how that would come about. And they see that is through the use of power and the use of authority. There's one thing I in terms of the measuring stick, and I just wanted to get this in. I skipped over some time. But it was a really good statement in terms of well, I'm not going to say anything about this, but anyway, it's basically saying that because we have the frameworks and the measuring sticks we have, we sort of assume that China's in seeking greater liberalization and freedom. They're not. They want to be able to master the tools to be able to use political control better for what they see is the glory of China and the Chinese people and their improvement. And so we think they're moving our way. They're not. But they want to use whatever tools are available and the measuring sticks available to see that their society prospers. And so it's a powerful argument. And it's one of the reasons it gets traction in a lot of countries.
Thank you so much. We have Dennis. Dennis, would you mind please unmute yourself? And
Hello.
then the next is Damon.
Hello, Professor Harvey.
We'll see you soon, Dennis.
My question to you would be, is the narrative that Xi Jinping is following one of nobility for the good of the country, or is this autocracy cowering or fearful of its loss of power? How would you play with that question?
Wow, that's a really interesting question, Dennis, because it's a little bit of both. Okay. One of the things that drives the Chinese Communist Party post Tiananmen, which Yang Penggang looked at a couple of weeks ago, is the fear that the rule by the Chinese Communist Party is about to collapse. They have a word for it in Chinese called Mali Hua Gemin, all right, the Jasmine Revolution. And they see it really, it almost unraveled in 1989. And so one of the things is to strengthen and solidify the Chinese Communist Party. And that is where it's really gone. Now, also at the same time, I think, is a little bit of the belief that they think they're doing pretty good. And that's why the Olympics was so important in China. There was a sense of the glory of China. Look what we've produced with the Bird's Nest Stadium and this being able to organize people in this powerful display, the rise of the economy. All right, the kind of things that they can master. And there's also a sense of incredible confidence that this will succeed, and the superiority of China to the nations, to the glory of the nation. I talked to Damon before going into this. This is really interesting. It's an idiom. I love idioms. All right, which is a really interesting idiom. And what it means is bitterness is the source of power, all right, or shame and humiliation. Humiliation in the ancient sense is not a bad thing. Until you're humiliated, you can't know what it means to succeed, all right? And it's an ancient truth within Chinese thought. And there's this sense of out of the humiliation of the Cultural Revolution, we will achieve. So on the one sense, there's this sense of our humiliation, our backwardness, and all those kind of things. But look at us now. And because we went through this, we were hardened, we were disciplined, and now we are going to succeed. So you get both. All right. And there's a truth in that.
Yeah, well, I see this kind of dichotomy between the Western way of thinking and maybe the Oriental way of thinking. So you mentioned about the self-autonomy, which is the liberal side, Western democracies, individualism, freedom of speech and all that, which has its strength, but it also can cause confusion.
And fragility.
Fragility and a lot of problems we see in the West. So on the other hand, so it has strengths, but it also has its weaknesses. On the other side, Oriental, we stress on community, uniformity, harmony. So we don't really stress on diversity, we stress on unity.
Right.
So the one side is diversity, the other side is unity, yeah. Which has its own strength. We do away with all this unnecessary argument, no? This is one line of thinking, very simple. But it also has its own weaknesses because it doesn't allow any essential or alternative ideas, so you can get stuck, self-contained. So I'm sorry, I'm a Trinitarian theologian. So this is a problem of how do you cope with diversity and unity together? How can we have diverse opinions and yet remain united? This is really a Trinitarian problem. So I think the Christian can come in and say, hey, the things that you value on the self-autonomy side, we can affirm, because each one of us is made in the image of God, all that stuff, we can make them. But on the other hand, the Bible also teaches us to be communal peoples, not totally individualistic. That we love our neighbors, we value community and harmony, really great harmony, the best harmony that we can find. So I think the Christian the worldview can actually speak into this dichotomy and say there may be a third way out between diversity and anarchy and unity and monologue. So there may be Christian can come in, there may be a third way out, which will be a blessing for all people. So I think we can play that card, which is not playing the game, but which is also true. Christian can really speak in this situation.
Yeah, I think you're right, David. I think one of the things I'd comment on, that's one of the reasons I love OCMS. And I'm gonna miss it, is the diversity of this place, to me, in some ways, represents the kingdom of God. I mean, when you look at the two cities that contrast each other in the Bible are Babel and Revelation. All right. In Babel, human beings are fractured and sent into a million shards, right? Because of a false attempt to make a unity apart from God. But Revelation is where all the nations with all their diversity flow together as brothers and sisters in Christ. Not by force, coercion, and manipulation, but by Christ and his compelling magnetism, like Chris Wright brought up so well in chapel a few weeks back. But that's something that we as Christians have to truly embrace. I mean, part of the problem is because of this lack of unity, that's not just in terms of China dealing with, but it's a problem here in England or North America, whether we build a higher wall or that kind of thing to keep the other out. And I understand some of the reasons for that and that kind of thing, but I think the church represents another way. But I always liked my professor, a guy named Stan Hauerwas. He had a big sign on his door. He said, can we just come to one simple agreement? Can we just agree with Christians to stop killing each other? And that's just really powerful. And it's one of the things like that I love about Salam's thesis. And that in Ethiopia that's torn apart by ethnic and tribal conflict, she came up with the idea of permeability. There's something about our faith and our reading of the common word, that we can see in our enemy ourselves and begin to embrace them. If we'll only embrace the good word of Christ and the good word of, loving our neighbor, who's a Samaritan, but we don't do that. But we need to keep trying.
Yeah.
And not seeing the foreigner as our enemy, but maybe our brother and sister. I mean, there's people on the other side of the trying to get in the United States on the border who are more my brother and sister than the person down the street, And I know that's a hard thing because people feel like we're being swamped or that kind of thing by foreigners coming in, but the church offers them. But it's not an easy one.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Right? So,
And then after
There's one hand up.
and then Ronald, you will be the third.
go ahead. Tom.
Yes, please, you are the first.
Thank you. I think it's really fascinating. One empirical question. So
He's a
from
critical
2000
researcher.
Awesome. So from 2013, have you witnessed any people in these four camps you just mentioned, particularly amongst the original 50% squad, which were here? Have anyone of them rebelled and joined a different side in the last?
Oh, switch sides.
Yeah. So I think they switch before that. I think they switch quite. It's not uncommon, Wang used to be a liberal on the liberal side before becoming a Christian. Liu Xiaopeng is a more complicated case, if not taking opposite form.
Yeah.
And even Jiang Qing, those new confident, they used to study Christianity very, very carefully. But I know the context changed a lot in the last 20 years. Have you seen any fluidity among?
I'd have to go back through all the delegates and follow that up, which I haven't done, right? So I can't say. There have been where you see the fluctuations are people, for instance, and Yang Penggang brought this out in his talk about the Tiananmen group. How some came over quite liberal and quite, radical in some ways, who become extremely conservative. I'm sure they're in the Trump camp, in terms of that kind of thinking. And so no, it's work I need to do. But it's really interesting. And people have been confused. Part of the problem is with the rise of the new stats and authoritarianism, which has moved into the universities, immediately the scholars bring their cards close to their chest and don't say anything, which is this is going to hurt the Chinese government in time. This is, one of the persons we had was Zhuo Xinping. Zhuo Xinping is head of the China Academy of Social Sciences, or was for a long time, and he came to the conference. When he got back and this rose, he towed his papers changed to toe the government line. But one of the reasons he was sent out to get his PhD, and a leading PhD in theology and what the church believes, because the Politburo was not getting good information about Christianity. They were being told by all their lackeys that there is no religion. People don't believe in God anymore. Everybody said, believes in the revolution, blah, 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 blah. And then they go out to the countryside. And there's the peasants are raising money and building these beautiful chapels out of bamboo, and the poor Communist Party official, if he wants to make agricultural statements to the farmers, he has to go to the church because they don't go to the party meetings. Then they go and interview the farmers and say, are the Christians paying you to go to the church? Because they have this myth of the rice Christians, right? And they go, no, they do not pay us money. In fact, we give our money. But if we go to the party meetings, they give us 5 yuan. So sometimes we go. So I always call them rice communists. But the problem is the very reason why the China Academy of Sciences was put out there, so the government would get good empirical evidence of what's actually happening, because they needed that to exercise policy. But when they do this kind of thing and they threaten the academics, they go silent. They just get quiet. So then you don't know what's happening. You don't know what's going on. All right. You don't. That's the reason why you don't go out and shoot all the academics. You won't know what the hell's going on. So, yeah. So that's part of our problem right now. Is a lot of these people are afraid to speak.
So the
And then we'll do Ron.
okay.
You go first.
All right, of the three groups that were here in Oxford, which would be the most sympathetic, supportive of Christianity?
Oh, boy. I would probably say probably the liberals, all right,
The
but not
left.
necessarily. What was achieved was mutual respect. And that, you see that in all the abstracts from the papers, as they were looking at Christianity for the first time and in conversation with each other. And it was just a sense of giving face to each other. And that remains. So next week, Nancy's gonna talk about He Guanghu, who's was a noted scholar at Beijing University. And there's a respect, not only that, once you start walking in Chinese academic circles, you start butting into Christians all the time. Because I've given lectures at different places, and there'll be someone from Shanghai, university, something like that, and they'll listen to my talk and they'll come up, oh, by the way, I'm a Christian too. I go, oh, wow. So, but it's hard to say. Everybody had their own kind of. There's people on New Left who like about the egalitarianism of Christ.
Yeah, our final question will be, Ronald, please unmute yourself.
Go ahead, Ron.
Hi, Tom. I've just got Steve Zhang's book in my hand, The Political Thought of Xi Jinping, which is just out. And there's an argument in there that he is really perpetrating a pretty huge lie, which is that the country is nothing without the party, and the party is nothing without him. And only he can deliver the China dream, according to his thought. Given that we've just had the Modi situation where Modi's personality cult has been severely clipped in the recent election, I wonder, when everybody starts to have a kind of personality cult like this, they usually always overreach, and then their shelf life is limited. Do you think this is going on with Xi Jinping?
Well, I always thought of that about myself, but yeah.
That your shelf life's very limited.
My friends would always come in and say, Tom, you're a legend in your own mind. But anyway. Okay, two ways of looking at that, Ron. It's not delusional. It's the nature of the thought pattern that is deep within China and many countries, that the head holds the body together, so that he must argue that way, so that he has the power over to do the things that need to be done, which in my other talk, which I thought I'm going to work further on once I no longer have to be dean. This is why the thinking of Carl Schmitt is so important. You see, when you look behind, Carl Schmitt was a legal scholar, juridical scholar in Germany in the 1920s and 30s, and he became virtually the Reichskanzler of the Third Reich. And what he argued for is that in confusion and anarchy, you must have the strong leader who has the power of what's called the state of exception, so that the law can be set aside to get at the nation's enemies and clear things up, and then somehow constitutionally be able to put the law back in place. But what that requires is someone who has ultimate power and who sees themselves as that I am the head of the whole body and the body is me. Now, that's very close to Roman Catholicism. All right, in the same sense, you could say the Pope within Catholicism is the head of the church, and the church then is founded in him. Mary would tap him on the shoulder, I think, and give him a reminder that he's not. But anyway, so there's some thinking in that, as that's where it's worked. And the other thing, he's getting reinforced in that by the leading constitutional scholars in China. They remind him of that every day, that without you, the nation falls apart. And in all fairness, I think there's a deep resonance with a lot of people within China for that. They want a righteous ruler who will be the standard bearer for the nation. Right now, I do go through scripture daily, and I'm writing the section with Solomon and Solomon's prayer. Solomon formed that kind of a role. When he became the king of Israel, he was Israel, Israel was him. Now I would agree with, the earlier passages that said, God's not necessarily in favor of that. He said, do you really want a king? The Lord should be king. But anyway, that would be my answer. I don't think it's delusional, not necessarily a big lie. I think it's the ideological framework that they wish to enhance. So, and they see it as the way forward, and it makes them more effective and more powerful. But don't let Trump get a hold of that book, or he'll.
So, with
He doesn't
that,
read books.
with that, we come to the end of this lecture. And thank you so much. Please join me to say thank you to us. Thank you. Though that is the end of our lecture, but please feel free to stay and have a chat with Tom if you have time.
Oh,
And
actually, I really don't have time. I'm supposed to join a conference on the Center for Reconciliation,
okay.
and we're gonna solve the Palestinian-Israel crisis in 12 minutes.
wow.
So, thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming. Have a good day.
Only one thing in front of that meeting.
Something to put out.